The duel on Mandalore is one of the coolest lightsaber fights in all of Star Wars. But the real weapon in that throne room isn't Ahsoka's blades or Maul's saber staff. It's a single word. When Maul reaches out his hand and asks her to join him, Ahsoka says, no. Change that one word to yes, and the entire Skywalker saga starts to crack. We're in the Mandalorian throne room, the Clone Wars are reaching their climax, and the galaxy is about 10 minutes from falling off a cliff. Outside, Rex and the clones are fighting Maul's loyalists in the burning streets. Inside, Maul is doing something no one expects from the cackling ex-apprentice, who once joked about, "There is no mercy." He's actually telling the truth. He lays out Sidious's long game, hints that the Republic is about to die, and reveals that Anakin Skywalker has been groomed as the next Sith apprentice. This conversation is, in my opinion, one of the most pivotal moments in all of Star Wars. Not because of the choreography, but because Maul is the only major character at this point who understands almost the entire plan. He knows about the Sith, the clones, the war, the fall of the Jedi, all of it, and Ahsoka is the one person in that room with the moral compass, the connection to Anakin, and the trust of people like Rex and Bo-Katan to actually do something with that information. So I thought it would be fun to treat this as the fracture point. Instead of walking through the Siege of Mandalore the way we already saw in Season 7, we're going to follow the complete alternate timeline that branches off the moment Ahsoka accepts Maul's offer. Now, there will be major spoilers for the Clone Wars, Revenge of the Sith, Rebels, and a bit of the Ahsoka series. So there's your warning. Now let's get started. In this version, Ahsoka doesn't just parry Maul's blade and reject him. She decides that stopping Sidious is worth teaming up with the one person who actually knows the rules of the game. That means their coup on Mandalore plays out completely differently. Bo-Katan and her Night Owls, Rex and his squad of clones, and Maul's remaining Shadow Collective forces all get pulled into a tense, shifting alliance that threatens to turn the Sith's perfect plan into a chaotic civil war. We're going to move through this new reality in order, from that throne room to Coruscant, to the moment Order 66 hits, and then far beyond. We'll track what happens to Anakin, the Jedi, the rise of the Empire, and even how this changes Rebels-era Ahsoka and Maul on Malachor. By the end, we'll see whether that one word on Mandalore saves the galaxy, or just breaks it in a different way. So to make that question actually mean something, we're going to rebuild the entire Clone Wars era around it. I thought it would be fun to treat this as a full alternate timeline, not just a quick what-if scene on Mandalore and then cut to credits. From the moment Ahsoka stands in that throne room with Maul, everything branches, and we follow that branch straight through the fall of the Republic and beyond. Our organizing principle is really simple. We're going in-universe chronological, not release order, not jumping between arcs the way the show did, but asking, what happened first in this reality, then what, then what? As I said, canon Clone Wars episodes are famously out of sequence. You'll have a Season 3 episode taking place before a Season 1 episode, or an Umbara arc that overlaps with other campaigns. So here, we're going to stitch those events together, then weave in Revenge of the Sith and key Star Wars Rebels moments to make one smooth narrative with one critical change. That change is the rule of this whole experiment. Everything before the duel on Mandalore happens exactly as in canon. Ahsoka leaves the Order, Fives dies on Coruscant, Maul builds his criminal empire, Anakin and Obi-Wan fight through 3 brutal years of war. The clones are still grown, trained, and chipped the same way. Then Maul reveals Sidious's plan, names Anakin as the future apprentice, and instead of rejecting him, Ahsoka accepts his offer. From that second on, we only alter what logically follows from that decision, based on established character motivations and power levels. So when we change something, it's because these people would reasonably act differently, not because we want a random Maul solos the galaxy power fantasy. Maul still hates Sidious more than anyone. Ahsoka is still loyal to Anakin and still not a Jedi Knight, which means she has freedom, but also blind spots. Bo-Katan still cares about Mandalore more than galactic politics. Rex and the clones are still bound by their inhibitor chips when Order 66 hits. Our job now is to ask, in each moment, how those same pieces move on a slightly different board. Now, there will be major spoilers as we go. We're going to reference the Clone Wars Season 7 in detail, walk through Revenge of the Sith from a different angle, pull in Rebels-era Ahsoka and Maul on Malachor, and even touch on later canon hints from The Mandalorian and Ahsoka. So, there's your warning if you somehow haven't seen all of that yet. Now, let's get started by stepping back one last time into that throne room on Mandalore. The siege is raging, the clones are fighting Maul's loyalists in the streets, and somewhere out there, Anakin is standing on the edge of his own destiny. Ahsoka hears Maul's offer, reaches a decision, and this time, she says yes. So before we can really twist the timeline, we need to sit in that throne room and feel just how tight the galaxy already is wound. Mandalore is on fire. Bo-Katan and her night owls are leading a desperate resistance in the streets, jetpacks flaring over a city that has seen way too many wars. Above them, Republic gunships roar through the smoke, dropping in the 332nd Company with their bright orange helmets painted for one person, Ahsoka Tano. Now, there will be major spoilers for the Siege of Mandalore arc, so there's your warning. At this point in the story, Ahsoka is technically a civilian advisor, not a Jedi general. She walks into battle with Rex and his clones under the Republic banner, but she's not answering to the council that pushed her out. She's answering to her own conscience, to Anakin's faith in her, and to the men on the ground who still salute her as Commander. On the other side of this war-torn city, Maul sits on a stolen throne. He's not just some random warlord, he's the former Sith apprentice of Darth Sidious, cut in half on Naboo, rebuilt through pure rage, and then thrown away again when his master no longer needed him. Now he rules Mandalore through the Shadow Collective, a web of underworld power that pulled in Death Watch, the Pike Syndicate, and Black Sun. This is important because Maul's reach is not limited to Separatist droids or Republic worlds. He has eyes and ears in the criminal underbelly that both sides pretend isn't there. As I said, that makes him uniquely dangerous and uniquely informed. When he talks to Ahsoka in that throne room, he isn't guessing. He knows Darth Sidious is Chancellor Palpatine. He knows Dooku has already been discarded. And crucially, he has pieced together that Anakin Skywalker is being groomed as Sidious's next apprentice. The "I have been waiting for you" energy he brings is not about Ahsoka at all. It's about luring Anakin into a trap that never quite springs. Meanwhile, Ahsoka is fighting her own war on the inside. She no longer trusts the Jedi Council, but she still believes in Jedi ideals. She doesn't know what we know about Anakin on Coruscant, but she feels something is wrong. And through all of this, she's standing shoulder to shoulder with clones who have painted their helmets in her honor. Clones who will, eventually, be ordered to turn on her. Hidden in their brains are inhibitor chips, the same kind that Fives almost exposed. At Sidious's command, those chips will flip, and loyal soldiers like Rex will become Jedi-killing machines in an instant. Ahsoka has no idea. Maul somehow only understands the shape of the plan, not this chilling detail. So when Maul offers an alliance, it isn't just to team up to dethrone him on Mandalore. It's a chance to act on knowledge nobody else has about Sidious and Anakin. I thought it would be fun to really lock that in before we change her answer, because once Ahsoka says yes, every blaster bolt in that city suddenly matters in a whole new way. Now, let's go back into that throne room and really sit with what Maul is putting on the table. He doesn't just swing a saber and rant about revenge. He lays out, step by step, a version of the Clone Wars where he's the only one who actually sees the full board. He names Sidious. He describes the grand plan. He even calls his shot about Anakin being groomed as the new apprentice. In canon, that speech is chilling because he's right. Maul tells Ahsoka the Jedi are already doomed, that the war is a long con engineered by Sidious, and that the Republic and Separatists are just two sides of the same blade. As I said, he isn't guessing. He lived as Sidious's weapon. He knows there's an order coming that will wipe the Jedi out before they even realize they were the clones in someone else's squad all along. Now, there will be major spoilers for the Clone Wars here, so there's your warning. Maul goes even further and centers Anakin. He insists that Skywalker is the key to everything, that Sidious has been shaping him from the shadows, and that the fall of the Jedi will run straight through that one night. To Ahsoka, this sounds impossible. To us, watching Revenge of the Sith, it's basically the plot synopsis. So why make this offer to Ahsoka of all people? Maul is not a hero suddenly seeing the light. He wants to burn Sidious's beautiful timeline to the ground. This is the same Maul who built the Shadow Collective, who seized Mandalore, who used Death Watch and the Underworld as tools. His motivations are revenge, survival, and power, in that order. Teaming up with Ahsoka is, for him, a strategic strike at his old master's favorite project. Ahsoka, however, is uniquely dangerous to Sidious's plan. She's Anakin's former Padawan, one of the very few people he actually listens to. She's respected by Rex, by the 501st, by Bo-Katan's forces, and even by Jedi who watched her walk away from the Order. She's not bound by the Council's debates or the Senate's red tape. If anyone could move faster than Sidious expects, it's the woman who already stepped outside the system. That's exactly where the tension lands. Ahsoka doesn't trust Maul, and of course she doesn't trust a vision of Anakin as a future Darth Vader. In the episode, you can hear it in her voice. She can believe the Jedi have lost their way, but she cannot believe that her Sky Guy is the knife in Sidious's hand. That emotional line is the real barrier, more than sabers or ideology. So what would it actually take for her to say yes? I thought it would be fun to really press on that question. Does Maul need to prove his knowledge of Anakin, reveal some specific memory, or force her to confront how much the Council has already failed him? The answer to that is where our divergence truly begins, and once we shift that one choice, the next thing that changes is who Ahsoka turns to when the first shots of Order 66 ring out on Mandalore. So we're back in that throne room on Mandalore, red glass shattering, alarms wailing, and this is where our entire timeline tilts. In the original episode, Ahsoka shuts Maul down the second he says Anakin's name. Here, she doesn't. She freezes. His words echo. He is the key to everything. And instead of rejecting it outright, she hears Anakin's voice, joking about the Council, calling them the biggest problem in the galaxy. Now, there will be major spoilers for her own past here, because her mind jumps straight back to the temple bombing. As I said, the Jedi Council was ready to let her be executed. They were so sure of themselves, so certain the war and the Republic justified everything, that they were willing to sacrifice one of their own Padawans. Maul talking about Sidious using the war as a tool doesn't sound crazy anymore. It sounds uncomfortably close to what she's already lived through. She studies him longer. This isn't a ranting brute from some random squad of Sith. This is the former apprentice of the very Phantom Master she's been hearing whispers about since the clones first marched. His story of a shadow pulling strings over Dooku, over Grievous, over the Senate, suddenly lines up with Fives dying on Coruscant, with the inhibitor chips, with how the clones were always just a little too ready for war. The real crack comes when she reframes what he's saying about Anakin. In canon, she hears groomed as his new apprentice, and immediately rejects the idea that her brother, the hero of the Republic, could fall. Here, something shifts. What if Anakin isn't the threat? What if he's the target? Sidious doesn't just want a replacement apprentice. He wants the most loyal, most powerful Jedi in the Order twisted or broken. And if that's true, then standing here arguing with Maul while Anakin walks blind toward that trap is the one thing she can't afford to do. So, there's your warning. This is the sentence that changes everything. Ahsoka ignites her blades, not in a killing stance, but in a decision. She tells Maul they will work together, but on her terms. No kneeling, no Sith titles, no my apprentice. Their goal is singular. Find Sidious, shatter his plan, and drag Anakin out of whatever web is closing around him. Maul is stunned for a heartbeat. Then that predatory smile creeps in. At last, he murmurs, savoring the irony that a former Jedi and a discarded Sith are about to stage a coup against his old master. Ahsoka doesn't smile. She's already thinking about Rex, about Bo-Katan, about how much to tell the clones without triggering panic. Now let's get started on the fallout, because from this point on, the battle for Mandalore's throne room stops being an ending and becomes the launchpad for their joint war against the Sith's grand design. The throne room doesn't calm down just because the sabers turn off. It actually gets more dangerous. Bo-Katan storms in with Rex and the 302nd, blasters trained on Maul, and in canon, this is where Ahsoka would have gone for the clean capture. Here, she does the opposite. She steps between Maul and their rifles and orders them to stand down. This is Ahsoka's first brutal compromise. These clones trust her with their lives. Bo-Katan has bled to get Maul off Mandalore, and now Ahsoka is protecting him. She can't drop the full Anakin revelation yet, so she reaches for the only frame that works. Maul is a temporary asset against a greater threat. She tells Rex there's a Sith plot that goes beyond the war, that Sidious is about to make his final move, and that Maul has information they need to stop it. She doesn't say Anakin is the target, but we can feel the words sitting in her throat. Bo-Katan is furious. This is the man who sat on her world's throne and turned Mandalore into a crime capital. Maul, of course, looks at her armor and her rage, and sees a useful local warlord at best. So there's your warning. The three-way standoff that follows is not about trust, it's about leverage. Ahsoka is the only one in the room trying to think about the galactic timeline. Bo-Katan is thinking about her people. Maul is already gaming out how to twist Sidious's plan to his own advantage. From here, the tactics on Mandalore change completely. In the original episode, they were focused on capturing Maul and stabilizing the city. Now, Ahsoka flips the priorities. She tells Rex and the 382nd that Maul is not the objective. Control of information is. The new orders are to secure communications hubs, data relays, and the prisons where Maul kept his enemies. I thought it would be fun to lean into how fast clones can pivot. 1 minute they're aiming at Maul, the next they're sprinting for control rooms, slicing consoles, and locking down HoloNet access. Maul proves his value immediately, which is terrifying. He walks them through his own Shadow Collective network on Mandalore, pointing out corrupt Mandalorian officers, secret safe houses buried under neutral districts, and underworld channels that Sidious could exploit to move assets off-world when the Republic falls. When he casually names officers Bo-Katan thought were loyal, it hits harder than any saber strike. As I said, this is the same Maul who ran crime syndicates. He knows every dirty alley. On the streets, we get this fragile joint control. Bo-Katan's night owls and loyalists hold intersections, disarm Maul's remaining loyalists, and project that Mandalore is finally free. The clones secure power grids, landing platforms, and those comm towers Maul warned them about, creating a web of checkpoints that report straight to Rex and Ahsoka. And Maul? He's in that awful in-between space, neither prisoner nor ruler, walking Mandalorian corridors under guard, offering just enough insight that killing him would feel reckless. Now, there will be major spoilers for where this uneasy alliance goes next, because everyone in that throne room expects Maul to betray them eventually. The real tension becomes whether Ahsoka can use him to reach Coruscant and Anakin before Sidious flips the switch on the clones. Now, let's get started with the people who feel this shift first, Rex and the 332nd. From Rex's point of view, this is one of the strangest briefings of the entire war. He's standing there in the Mandalorian throne room, watching Ahsoka Tano, his former commander, the one he trusts more than almost any Jedi, order her men to keep their blasters off the man who just butchered clones in the tunnels. As I said, Rex has seen bad generals and traitors before, but he's never seen Ahsoka spare someone like Maul. Rex's loyalty has always been simple. You follow the chain of command, you protect your squad, and you trust the Jedi who've bled beside you. Now that structure bends. Ahsoka isn't a Jedi general anymore, Maul isn't officially an enemy in this room, and the Republic itself feels very far away on Coruscant. I thought it would be fun to zoom in on Rex's helmet here, because we know that under that T-visor, his expression is a mix of confusion, concern, and that stubborn faith he always has in Commander Tano. For the 332nd, it's even more raw. These are the clones who literally painted Ahsoka's markings on their helmets. They were cheering when she came back, quoting that classic, "We're just glad to have you back, Commander." Energy. And now, they're being told to escort Maul through Mandalorian corridors instead of gunning him down for what he did to their brothers. Some of them walked past bodies in those tunnels that morning. The smell of blaster scoring is still in their armor. One trooper grips his DC-15 just a little too tight as Maul walks by in binders. Another mutters over squad comms that the Zabrak should be spaced out in airlock. But they hold, because Ahsoka says this is part of stopping something bigger. That's the key shift. For the first time, she's not framing the war as Republic versus Separatists. She's framing it as all of them versus an unseen puppet master. And the cruel part is that we, as the audience, know there's another unseen master already inside their heads. Every one of these clones has an inhibitor chip sitting quietly in their brain tissue, waiting for a single coded phrase from Darth Sidious. Fives died trying to expose that, Rex was there on Kamino when the first hints surfaced. Now, there will be major spoilers for how that pays off, so there's your warning. But this Mandalore moment becomes the emotional setup. Ahsoka gathers the 332nd in a hangar bay before departure. She tells them Maul isn't an ally, but a resource, and that the real enemy is someone who's been playing both the Senate and the Separatist Council from the beginning. She doesn't name Sidious yet, because even she doesn't fully grasp the scope, but she warns that orders may come soon that don't make sense, and that blind obedience is exactly what this Phantom wants. For some clones, that speech lands hard. They remember Pong Krell. They remember Umbara. They hear echoes of Fives talking about control chips and conspiracies. Those troopers lean even closer to Ahsoka, deciding in that moment that if something feels wrong, they'll look to her before the Republic crest on their chest. Others hear the same words and feel something colder. Doubt in the Republic sounds a little too close to treason. Protecting Maul feels like spitting on their fallen brothers. A few of them go quiet, storing away this image of Ahsoka standing beside a Sith as proof that the Jedi, or former Jedi, aren't as pure as they thought. And when Order 66 hits, those tiny fractures in trust are going to matter. The chips will fire in every skull at once, but not every finger will squeeze the trigger with the same certainty. Some will hesitate for a heartbeat, some won't. The question is who, standing in that hangar now, is already on a different path, and which of them will be aiming down their sights at Ahsoka when the storm finally breaks. So, standing in that hangar now, Ahsoka has no idea that the person who's about to rewire her entire understanding of the war is the horned Sith she just agreed to follow. Now, let's get started with what Maul actually tells her once the blasters go quiet and the doors seal. Maul takes her into a secure Mandalorian command chamber, the kind of place where Death Watch once planned raids and coups, and turns it into a classroom of pure horror. He lays out the timeline of the Clone War in a way we've never heard in the show. Every battle, every crisis, every vote in the Senate, all orchestrated by one shadow, Darth Sidious. The Separatists, the Republic, the Senate, the banking clan, they were all pieces on his Dejeric board. He explains that Count Dooku was never the true leader of the Separatists. Dooku was a disposable apprentice, groomed to recruit the clones' template, to commission the army, and to keep the Jedi chasing droids while Sidious sat in the very heart of the Senate. Now, there will be major spoilers for the prequels here, so there's your warning. Maul spells out that Sidious is the Chancellor himself, the man the Jedi trust with emergency powers, and that those powers are about to become permanent. Then he drops the part Ahsoka can barely stand to hear. Anakin Skywalker is the key. Maul doesn't know the exact shape of the plan, but he has felt Sidious's obsession through the Force. Sidious has been grooming Skywalker as a successor, whispering to him, isolating him, feeding his anger and fear. Maul senses a decisive event about to erupt on Coruscant, centered on Anakin, Sidious, and the Jedi Temple. As I said, this is Maul connecting dots the Council never even saw. Ahsoka pushes back. She remembers the hero of the Outer Rim sieges, the man who joked that he was a slow learner while jumping out of gunships. How could that person fall? But then the cracks line up. The Council never trusted Anakin with full information. They were already spying on the Chancellor, and they pushed Ahsoka out when she needed them most. The same pattern of secrecy that broke her faith now makes Maul's story feel terrifyingly plausible. Here's the pattern interrupt. Maul suddenly pauses, eyes distant, and says, "Dooku is gone. Not captured, dead." He feels the vacuum in the dark side. That means Sidious has already moved to the final phase. The inhibitor chips in the clones are about to be triggered. The Jedi will be branded traitors, and they have hours, maybe days at most, before the temple burns. So Ahsoka does what she always does in a crisis. She turns Maul's intel into a mission. She resolves to reach Anakin and Obi-Wan directly, not through the Council, to confront them with what Maul has revealed, and expose Sidious before Order 66 can fully spring. And to do that, she's going to need ships, codes, and ironically, the very clones who are walking around with a kill switch in their heads. So now, we hit one of the most frustrating parts of this entire alternate timeline, because Ahsoka finally has world-shattering intel, and the one thing she can't get is a clean line to the people who need it most. She's standing in a half-ruined Mandalorian command center. Maul's forces and Republic clones still skirmishing in the streets, and she's demanding a secure channel to Coruscant like it's a weapon. She doesn't go through normal military routing. She orders Rex to pull every clearance code he has, and Maul, of course, smirks and adds his own slicers into the mix. Now, there will be major spoilers for Revenge of the Sith timing here, so there's your warning. While Ahsoka is trying to punch through the holonet, the Battle of Coruscant is raging. Jedi cruisers are burning, clones are dying by the thousands, and every priority channel is flooded with Mayday calls and tactical chatter. On the Republic side, we see the bureaucratic resistance kick in. A harried clone officer on a Star Destroyer gets an incoming ping from Mandalore labeled High Priority from civilian consultant Tano, and a flagged Sith asset. That alone makes him hesitate. Protocol says this goes to a regional Jedi general first, not straight to the Council, so Ahsoka's warning is already getting bounced through layers of filters before anyone even hears her voice. When she finally cuts through to the temple, she doesn't get Anakin or Obi-Wan. She gets Yoda's small, flickering image, with Mace Windu pacing just out of frame, clearly in the middle of something. As I said, we know exactly what that something is from the movie. They're debating whether the Chancellor has gone too far and if they should move to arrest him. Ahsoka feels that tension without knowing the details, and it pushes her to rush. She tells them there's a Sith Lord embedded in the Senate, orchestrating both sides. She says Maul confirmed the Sith's name as Sidious and that this Sidious has targeted Anakin specifically. But when she starts to explain that her source is the former Sith apprentice who just tried to overthrow Mandalore, you can almost hear the skepticism through the hollow static. Mace presses her for verifiable proof. Yoda asks calm, probing questions. Time is draining away. I thought it would be fun to point out that this is the exact inverse of Fives on Coruscant. He had hard evidence and no audience. Ahsoka has a partial audience, and almost no evidence they're willing to trust. She begs to speak to Anakin directly, to warn him that the Chancellor is not what he seems. Mace glances off screen. We know Palpatine is already tightening his grip, keeping Anakin close. The clone operator reports Skywalker is unavailable in the middle of the crisis. The call quality drops. The battle over Coruscant surges. In the end, the Council logs her intel as unconfirmed but of concern. They decide it conveniently supports their growing suspicion of Palpatine, yet they still move on their own timetable. Ahsoka's channel cuts out before she can force the issue, and she's left staring at empty blue static. Now let's get started on the fallout of that near miss, because Sidious's plan keeps rolling almost unchanged, for now, but Ahsoka and Maul have just nudged the board in a way he didn't fully account for. Sidious feels that nudge almost instantly. While Ahsoka and Maul are still standing in the shattered throne room on Mandalore, arguing about Anakin's fate, the dark side ripples, and on Coruscant. The Chancellor closes his eyes for just a moment longer than usual. He has felt Maul's presence before, of course. But this is different. Maul is no longer just a discarded apprentice, clinging to power through crime syndicates and Mandalorian armor. In the Force, their new alliance registers as a sharp, discordant note. Maul's burning hatred braided together with a focused, light-side presence that Sidious recognizes from the Siege of Mandalore reports as the former Padawan of Anakin Skywalker. As I said, that combination gets his attention. Now, there will be major spoilers, so there's your warning. In canon, Maul is a nuisance. Here, he is a variable. Sidious calmly reassesses. Ahsoka is off the Jedi grid, technically a civilian, which means the Council barely tracks her. Maul is dangerous, but ultimately expendable. Sidious already broke him on Mandalore once, and Mandalore itself, strategically minor compared to Coruscant, the Temple, and the Senate. The real war is for Anakin's soul, but two powerful Force users working together near a huge clone garrison could complicate the clean execution of Order 66. So, Sidious does what he always does. He adjusts the script without anyone realizing there was a rewrite. On secure channels to Kamino, he has the Kaminoans review the contingency protocols buried inside the inhibitor chip programming. Quietly, Ahsoka Tano and Maul are flagged as high-priority rogue assets. That means when Order 66 comes down, any clone who sees them won't hesitate, even if they fought side by side an episode ago. At the same time, He cedes new instructions to key cloned commanders, to Rex's superiors, to Cody, to a few others scattered through the fleet. He frames it as simple battlefield clarification. If the former Padawan associated with Skywalker appears, she is to be treated as a potential co-conspirator in a Jedi coup. The clones don't know they're being tuned. They were bred to follow orders, just like Domino Squad. While those orders propagate through the war machine, Sidious turns back to his main project, Anakin. I thought it would be fun to zoom in here, because this is where Palpatine really leans in. In private, he pushes harder on Anakin's fear of losing Padme, hinting more openly that the Jedi would never understand what he must do to save her. He even folds Ahsoka into the narrative. She walked away from the Order. She questioned the Council. If she returns now, what side will she really be on? The seed is simple. If even Ahsoka could turn on the Jedi, then the Jedi could turn on Anakin. By the time Ahsoka believes she's moving first, racing to expose Sidious with Maul at her side, the Sith Lord has already woven her into the tapestry of his purge. Order 66 is no longer just a command, it's a stress test. Can any stray piece on the board, even a former apprentice and a renegade Padawan, actually break his design? Our next turn in the timeline will show his answer. Now, let's get started right where we left off, because this is the moment the Siege of Mandalore bends in a completely different direction. Ahsoka doesn't walk away from Maul's offer in the throne room. She takes it, and suddenly all of his half-mad rambling about Sidious and Skywalker becomes a tactical asset instead of background noise. Maul knows exactly which of his forces will never stand down, the most fanatical Mandalorians, the lieutenants tied directly into the Shadow Collective, the ones who would fight to the last thermal detonator rather than surrender. Ahsoka and Bo-Katan use that intel immediately. They target those pockets first, hitting key strongholds before the Loyalists can scatter into the Undercity. It turns what was a brutal street-by-street grind in the original episode into a much sharper, faster decapitation strike. Instead of waiting for Gar Saxon's people to call in help, they move to cut the lines. Maul points out hidden comm relays and landing zones where Black Sun and Pike reinforcements were scheduled to arrive. Bo-Katan's Night Owls and the 332nd hit those sites hard. We can picture Rex coordinating air support while Ahsoka carves through a landing pad, gunships blasting apart transports that never get to unload. The Shadow Collective isn't just beaten, it's isolated and strangled before it can breathe. But once the guns quiet down, we get a different kind of battle. Now, there will be major spoilers for Maul's ego here, so there's your warning. Bo-Katan wants him in a cell yesterday. She's seen what his rule did to her people. To her, the only acceptable outcome is Maul chained in Mandalorian Durasteel, handed over to the Republic or left in a deep dark hole. Ahsoka pushes back. As I said, she's heard the name Sidious from him, she's heard Anakin mentioned as a target, and with Coruscant still under attack in the broader timeline, she feels the clock ticking. Maul leans into that tension. He plays the wounded prophet, reminding Ahsoka that without him, she's chasing a ghost, while taunting Bo-Katan with little digs about Satine and noble rulers who die for nothing. It's very much Maul doing his best Hondo impression, except with fewer jokes about splitting the prophet. The compromise they land on is ugly but functional. Maul will not roam free, but he also won't be thrown in a basic cage. Rex steps in here and starts thinking like a commander, planning a long campaign rather than a prisoner transfer. The 332nd begins prepping a modified Venator-class cruiser, not just with containment cells and interrogation rooms for Maul, but with a full command center dedicated to tracking Sidious, Anakin, and any leads they can scrape from Republic and Underworld channels. This takes time, and that delay is crucial. Mandalore stabilizes just enough for Bo-Katan to stand as regent, working with what's left of the city's infrastructure and the clones still on the ground. Ahsoka feels, for the first time in a long while, that she can leave without everything collapsing behind her. She believes she's bought herself a narrow, but real window to confront Anakin and the Council, to force the truth into the open. What she doesn't know, of course, is that the window is already closing. Order 66 is only hours away, coded into every trooper around her. That's our pattern interrupt. The more secure she feels, the more lethal the trap actually becomes. We end this phase of the story on a single image. Ahsoka, Rex, and Maul boarding that cruiser together, a trio that should never exist, lifting off from a wounded Mandalore and heading straight toward Coruscant. The heart of the Republic is calling them in, and the next turn in our timeline will show how hard it hits back. Now, let's get started by zooming out. While that cruiser pulls away from a burning Mandalore, our timeline snaps back into alignment with Revenge of the Sith. As Ahsoka, Rex, and Maul jump to hyperspace, Anakin and Obi-Wan are already in the middle of their heroic rescue above Coruscant. Dooku is dead, the invisible hand is falling, and Palpatine has just watched Anakin cross a line he can't uncross. That's important, because it means the seeds of Anakin's fall aren't theoretical anymore. They were watered in that throne room when Palpatine whispered, "Do it," and Anakin obeyed. So, as I said, when Ahsoka races toward the core with Maul's warnings about Sidious and a coming new apprentice, that apprentice has already been chosen. She's not trying to prevent the first step, she's trying to derail a train that's already at full speed. Back on Coruscant, the Jedi Council is in crisis mode. Now, there will be major spoilers for the ROTS timeline, so there's your warning. The war looks almost won, but the Council is more suspicious of Palpatine than ever. He's held on to emergency powers, he's reluctantly accepted more authority, and now he's personally survived a separatist kidnapping. In response, they do two things that are absolutely brutal for Anakin's state of mind. First, they put him on the Council at Palpatine's request, but refuse to grant him the rank of Master. That's the take a seat moment we all remember, and it hits him right where he's most fragile. Second, they quietly order him to spy on Palpatine, turning his mentor into an assignment and his loyalty into a test. So Anakin is stewing in resentment, pride, and fear, hearing "trust the Council" from Mace, while hearing "they don't trust you" from Palpatine. Now line that up with Ahsoka's absence. In canon, once she leaves Mandalore, she never actually reconnects with Anakin before the temple burns. The clones of the 500-verse fight on Coruscant, without her, he falls, and their reunion never happens. In this timeline, she's doing the opposite. She is sprinting toward him with Maul's claim that Sidious has groomed Anakin as his new apprentice, echoing in her mind. The tragedy is that the window to change his path is already closing to a sliver, and there's one more piece on the board, General Grievous. He's still at large on Utapau, and the Council is about to send Obi-Wan to finish the war. Once Kenobi leaves, Anakin will be alone with Palpatine at the exact worst possible moment. So we now have two converging stories: Anakin's slow-motion fall on Coruscant, and Ahsoka's desperate attempt to reach him in time, both racing toward the same fixed point in the timeline. Order 66 is waiting at the intersection, and the next episode of this What If will show which side hits it first. So, as those two timelines race toward each other, we hard cut to hyperspace. The blue tunnel is humming outside the viewport, everything looks calm, and that's exactly when the galaxy snaps. On the 332nd's cruiser, the clones are in that quiet in-between space, checking gear, chatting about how weird it is working with Maul as a guest, when every helmet comlink clicks over to a secure channel they were never supposed to hear. We stay tight on Rex and the squad around him. The bridge officers straighten as the hologram of Chancellor Palpatine flickers to life, hooded, voice suddenly colder than any of them have ever heard. We've all seen this episode from the Jedi side, but I thought it would be fun to sit with the clones this time, as he says the words, "Execute Order 66. They were bred to obey that phrase without question, and you can almost feel the chip in every skull switch on like a detonator. Rex's pistol hand trembles, his breath catches, his vision blurs, and the hollow of Ahsoka standing beside him doubles for a second. As I said, we know this moment, the tear in his eye, the fight against programming. But now, there's an extra variable. Maul isn't locked in a simple ray-shielded box. He's down the corridor, ringed by troopers with rifles trained on him, treated as a semi-cooperative asset who might help track Sidious. That makes Rex's hesitation even more dangerous, because his men are already pivoting to eliminate 2 targets instead of 1. At the same instant, Ahsoka staggers. The Force slams into her in the middle of the corridor, and the sound design here would go wild. Overlapping screams, sabers cutting off mid-swing, Masters she knew from half the Clone Wars timeline blinking out like extinguished candles. Plo Koon, Ayla, Depa, Ki-Adi. She braces on the bulkhead, eyes wide, and when she looks up, the clones around her are raising blasters, not just at her, but toward the blast doors where Maul is being held. Their expressions are blank, mechanical. It's Five's worst nightmare coming true. Behind those doors, Maul hears the blaster safeties click and just smiles that bitter, knowing smile. So, it comes at last, he mutters. He recognizes Sidious's move instantly. This is the culling he tried to warn her about on Mandalore. Rage and vindication crash together. Using the split second where their formation shifts, he twists his bound wrists, slams a guard into the ceiling, and rips a rifle free. In close quarters, he's a red storm, cutting through clones with terrifying efficiency. No stuns, no hesitation, almost quoting his own, running blind in the dark. Line back at Sidious with every kill. Now, there will be major spoilers for where this goes, so there's your warning. Ahsoka sprints toward Rex, deflecting bolts, shouting his name, reaching through the chaos for that sliver of free will. She can sense the chip burning in his mind, the same horror Fives tried to describe. In the same breath, she feels Maul tearing down the ship's security web. She's forced into an impossible triage. Shield Rex long enough to remove his chip, survive the 330-second turning on their former commander, and decide whether to unleash Maul completely as a weapon against Sidious, or keep him leashed and risk being overwhelmed. Now, let's get started on the fallout of whichever choice she makes, because that decision is about to decide who walks out of this cruiser alive. So, there's your warning, because the moment Ahsoka stuns Rex and drags him toward the medbay, this timeline gets brutal fast. The cruiser is already shaking from Maul's chaos, but now, accepting his offer means she's counting on that chaos to keep her alive. We follow her sprint through those corridors with blaster bolts hammering the walls. In the canon episode, the clones were confused and fragmented. Here, Maul's rampage has forced them into full lockdown mode. Sirens are blaring, blast doors slam shut in sequence, and Ahsoka is literally sliding under one as it closes, Rex over her shoulder, deflecting stun fire because she still refuses to kill the squad that painted their helmets for her. Cut to Maul, and he is not holding back. He tears through the decks like a storm, using the Force to rip bulkheads out of the walls, crush entire fire teams, and hurl clone troopers into the ceiling. They were trained for droids and Jedi, not a Sith who has nothing left to lose. At one point, he pulls an entire corridor's worth of panels down, pinning a squad in twisted metal, and you can almost hear him snarling about being a pawn of Sidious yet again. That contrast is important. While Maul leaves a trail of bodies, Ahsoka is in the medbay, setting her sabers aside, telling the droids to use stun settings only on approaching clones. As I said, she's chosen a side, but she hasn't stopped being Ahsoka. I thought it would be fun to lean into that visual. Blue blades gone, just surgical lamps and the whine of medical tools as she and the droids dig into Rex's skull to find the chip Fives died trying to expose. Now, there will be major spoilers for Rex's emotional state here. He wakes up the same way, hands shaking, tears in his eyes, whispering that he almost killed her. But in this version, he also remembers raising his blasters at Maul, the prisoner Ahsoka spared, and then feeling absolute, programmed certainty that executing both of them was the right call. That realization hits him harder than any stun blast. The clones outside are cutting through the door. Time's up. This is where Ahsoka makes the hardest call of the whole crash. She orders the droids to drop every remaining restraint on Maul and open his access to the ship's systems. Full doors, comms, power relays, all of it. A chaotic Maul ripping the cruiser apart is, in her mind, still better than a clean, orderly execution carried out by her own brothers. Pattern interrupt. For a second, Maul actually hesitates. Freedom, access, and two former enemies offering a temporary alliance against Sidious. He accepts, of course. Now let's get started on the darkest pact this ship will ever see. By the time the cruiser begins its doomed descent, Ahsoka, Rex, and Maul are officially fugitives from the newborn Empire, trapped in a metal coffin full of hostile clones. The only way out is to keep this fragile partnership alive long enough to survive the crash. and then decide what kind of war they're going to wage next. The cruiser's descent stops being a tense escape and turns into a horror episode the second Maul really cuts loose. In canon, he rips the hyperdrive apart and causes chaos. Here, he goes further. He tears into the power grid, severs stabilizers, and laughs over the comms as the ship lurches into a dead fall. This Venator becomes a metal coffin, and Maul is perfectly fine being buried in it if it means drowning the clones in fire. We stay in that chaos for a moment. Sirens howl, gravity shifts, and rows of loyal troopers are thrown across corridors they were just patrolling. Ahsoka and Rex feel every impact. These are their men. They were a squad a few hours ago. Now, there will be major spoilers for their fates, so there's your warning. As the hull screams, Ahsoka forces herself to focus, shouting over the comm to Maul, demanding he stop destroying the ship they are still on. Maul only gives them the bare minimum. He snarls back coordinates, not comfort. He slices through clones in the hangar, clearing a path, while Rex and Ahsoka race through collapsing decks toward a secondary shuttle bay. It's coordination, not trust. Rex covers their rear, stunning troopers where he can, dropping others when he has to. Ahsoka deflects blaster fire, feeling that awful echo of the inhibitor chips in every mind she brushes. Maul, of course, quips that this is what Jedi loyalty earns them. I thought it would be fun to really lean into the tactical side here. They time their run with Maul's sabotage. When he blows the main reactor conduits, artificial gravity cuts out again, and whole squads of clones are thrown into the void as hangar doors shear away. Ahsoka and Rex slam into a shuttle, blast off just ahead of the cruiser's final tumble, and Maul peels away in another craft. Engines screaming through debris, the crash is still brutal. The Venator carves a graveyard into the surface of that nameless moon. Smoke, snow, and shattered hull plates form a twisted memorial. Ahsoka climbs from the wreckage and, as I said, she cannot just walk away. She and Rex spend hours digging through wreckage, lining fallen clones in rows, turning helmets into crude markers. It mirrors the original timeline, but this time Maul watches from a distance, arms crossed. He mocks the ritual, calling them tools, not brothers. But he also studies Ahsoka's face, the way Rex's hands shake as he sets each helmet down. This attachment is a weakness he can exploit later, and he files it away as carefully as any Sith lesson from Sidious. Now, let's get started on their disappearances. Instead of Ahsoka faking her death alone, she and Rex construct a full illusion. They leave Ahsoka's sabers in the wreck, Rex's customized armor scattered nearby, blaster scoring arranged to suggest they died defending the crash site. To any Imperial investigator, the story writes itself. Maul, of course, wants no part of their sentiment. He activates old Shadow Collective frequencies, calls in a discreet pickup, and vanishes into the underworld. 3 fugitives, same disaster, completely different wars. Ahsoka and Rex go to ground with a new mission. Trace Anakin's fate through any rumor they can find. Maul slips into the shadows, already plotting how to turn this newborn empire against Sidious from within. The clones are dead, but their ship has just launched 3 separate campaigns. So what happens when those campaigns start colliding? Now, let's get started with what those separate campaigns actually look like on the ground, because Ahsoka and Rex do not just hide in a farmhouse and retire. They treat the fall of the Republic like a battlefield problem, gather intel, verify sources, then move. Their first weapon is the past. They were clones' commanders and a general's apprentice, so they still know old Republic codes, backdoors into holonet relays, and a few slicer tricks Anakin definitely did not learn from slicing the school files, as he once joked. Ahsoka and Rex bounce from fringe worlds to refueling depots, pinging dormant frequencies, trying to piece together a new, terrifying timeline. What comes back is a shattered story. Fragments about the Jedi Temple burning, confused reports that clone troopers stormed the halls, emergency bulletins replaced overnight by a single clean message. The Republic is now the Galactic Empire. And threaded through all of that is one official tale. Anakin Skywalker died a hero, hunting down traitorous Jedi and saving the Chancellor's life. Now, there will be major spoilers for Ahsoka's emotions here, so there's your warning. She hears that and the floor just drops out. On paper, this is exactly the kind of noble end the Holonews would invent. In her heart, though, something is wrong. When she meditates, trying to reach for her former master, the way she used to across half a galaxy, the Force does not feel empty. It feels twisted. As I said, Ahsoka has felt death through the Force before. With Anakin, it is different. His presence isn't gone. It is distant, smothered under something cold, like hearing his voice through a storm of static. Every time she focuses on him, there's this pull toward a dark, mechanical breathing in the background of the galaxy, and she snaps herself out of it before she falls in. At the same time, rumors start to attach to the Emperor's side. Spacers talk about an armored figure inspecting shipyards. A scared senator whispers about a dark warrior who walked into a meeting, and every officer suddenly forgot how to breathe. No one has a name yet. Some call him the Emperor's Fist. Others just say, "Don't make him look at you." While Ahsoka chases those shadows, Rex is fighting a different battle. He is living with the knowledge of the inhibitor chips and the fact that his own squad turned on her and the Jedi. Survivor's guilt hits him hard, so he uses the same underground contacts to quietly flag clone units that went missing, med stations where troopers are acting strangely, any chance to pull even one brother out from under that programming. The two of them start to diverge in focus. Rex is trying to save what's left of the clones. Ahsoka is zeroing in on the contradiction between Anakin the dead hero and Anakin the smothered presence in the Force. I thought it would be fun to say that this is just a personal quest, but Maul's warning about Sidious grooming Skywalker keeps replaying in her mind. Eventually, she realizes she cannot just disappear and wait this out. The Temple Massacre, the Empire's rise, and that dark echo of Anakin all point to one conclusion. Sidious has won a war the Jedi never understood. If she walks away now, she leaves the galaxy to him, and to whatever Anakin has become. So Ahsoka makes a decision. She will oppose Sidious, not as a Jedi general, but as something new. And if that path leads her straight toward the Emperor's mysterious enforcer, she will follow it, even if the mask comes off, and it is Anakin staring back at her. The only question is, who will reach that truth first? Ahsoka, Maul, or the monster already serving at Sidious's side? Now, let's jump over to Maul, because while Ahsoka is choosing her own path, he is not just disappearing into the sands of Malachor. He is sharpening his hatred. I thought it would be fun to really track his timeline here, because this is where he quietly becomes the anti-Sidious hiding in the shadows. After escaping the chaos of Mandalore, Maul goes back to what he knows best, the underworld. The Shadow Collective was shattered, but not dead. Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, the remnants of Death Watch, they were scattered crime clans now, not a proper squad. Maul starts reactivating them one by one. He appears in their fortresses without warning, cuts down a few overconfident guards, and then offers a choice that sounds very familiar in Star Wars: serve or be destroyed. The Empire's birth actually hands Maul his recruiting pitch. Imperial crackdowns in the Outer Rim push smugglers off their routes, topple petty warlords, and leave whole droid foundries abandoned. Maul sweeps in behind the stormtroopers. Displaced captains become his blockade runners. Angry warlords become his regional enforcers. Separatist tanks and spider droids, left to rust on forgotten battlefields, are dragged into hidden hangars and reprogrammed. They were no longer fighting for a flag. They were fighting in Maul's private war. Now, there will be major spoilers for some of the early Empire era here, so there's your warning. As I said, Sidious replaces Maul with a new apprentice, and Maul cannot let that go. In this timeline, he is obsessed with finding out who it is. He interrogates captured inquisitors, tears information out of corrupt governors, and has slicers raid Imperial holonets for redacted files. Somewhere out there is the monster standing where he should have stood, and Maul is convinced that Apprentice is both rival and weak point. Then we get a small pattern interrupt. In the middle of all this rage, Maul does something almost patient. He tells his lieutenants to keep tabs on one specific name that keeps popping up in rumor, Ahsoka Tano. Through informants on backwater worlds and whispers from surviving clones who heard about a Togruta with white blades, he tracks her shadow. Will she become the fulcrum that topples Sidious, or just another lost Jedi hiding in some alley on Coruscant, muttering, "I'm one with the Force," The Force is with me to stay sane. Now, let's get started on Maul's actual strategy. He knows he cannot yet strike the Emperor directly, so he chooses something slower, crueler, and in his mind, more satisfying. He will poison Sidious's new empire from the bottom up. Supply lines will rot. Governors will answer to him before they fear Coruscant. The criminal underworld will turn into a grinding resistance that looks like pure greed on the surface, but in reality, every credit and every blaster is being pointed by one will, Maul's. And the more Sidious tightens his grip, the more Maul plans to slip through his fingers. Maul's shadow empire grows in the underworld, but the first real collision with the new Imperial machine comes on a world that already knows what it means to be abandoned. It's an old separatist fortress world on the Mid-Rim, once shelled by the Republic and then quietly written off. In this timeline, surviving Jedi and a handful of rogue clones have slipped there after Order 66, using abandoned droid foundries as bunkers. They were teachers, scouts, and protectors for refugees who had already lived through one war. Now the Empire brands the entire planet a hotbed of insurrection, and sends a task force to make an example out of it. I thought it would be fun to root this in that early Imperial era we only glimpse in Rebels. So, there's your warning. This is where the nostalgia of the Clone Wars really starts to collide with the horror of the Empire. Ahsoka, traveling with Rex and a small squad of de-chipped clones, intercepts whispers about Inquisitors heading for the system. For her, this isn't strategic, it's personal. She hears that a former Jedi healer is there, tending fugitives, and she refuses to let another temple massacre happen on her watch. Maul hears about the same crackdown from a very different source. Smugglers tell him the Empire is moving prototype tracking tech and encrypted clearance codes through that sector, guarded by green stormtroopers and overconfident officers. For Maul, this is perfect. A world full of bitter ex-separatists, abandoned clones, and terrified civilians is a recruiting ground. Break the Imperial convoy, steal the intel, whisper the right promises, and suddenly his criminal syndicate has teeth. So now we have three trajectories converging. Ahsoka and Rex drop out of hyperspace in a battered civilian freighter, using old Republic clearance codes that barely work. They land in the industrial quarter and move door to door, warning people about the Inquisitorius, explaining that these are not just Jedi hunters, they are trained to break entire communities. Rex rallies the clone holdouts, some still in mismatched Phase 2 armor, and you can almost hear an echo of his old line about soldiers following orders for the good of the people. At the same time, Maul hits the outskirts. His forces ambush stormtrooper convoys along the main supply road, ripping open hover tanks with the Force, and turning captured E-11s back on their owners. To the refugees, he's just another warlord. To the disillusioned separatist veterans, he sounds eerily familiar when he talks about corrupt republics and hidden Sith masters. Then Vader arrives. He comes down in a dagger-shaped command shuttle, flanked by a pair of Inquisitors. As I said, this is the Emperor's new fist, still relatively fresh in the armor, still burning hot. The moment he steps onto the surface, Ahsoka feels it. A presence in the Force that is searingly familiar and impossibly wrong. She staggers on a rooftop, hand to her chest, whispering Anakin's name, then shutting it down because that cannot be him. What follows is a set of parallel battles that never quite touch but constantly echo. Ahsoka and Rex clash with an Inquisitor in the streets, blue blades and blaster bolts flashing off rusted droid parts. Rex calls out precise clone-style fire lanes while Ahsoka dances through the fight, using moves we remember from the Siege of Mandalore. They were so close to seeing who led this hunt, but every time she reaches out, that burning presence withdraws, focused elsewhere. Elsewhere is Maul's hunting ground. He tears through stormtrooper platoons in the industrial canyons, savoring their fear. When a terrified lieutenant blurts out, "Lord Vader will deal with you," Maul freezes for just a heartbeat. The name is new, but the cold behind it is not. Vader, meanwhile, moves methodically through the foundry levels, sensing prey. He crushes the last pockets of clone resistance, without even igniting his saber at first, using the Force to hurl them against durasteel walls. One of the old clones, helmet off, stares at him and mutters a half-formed, "General," before Vader's blade silences him. The pattern interrupt here is timing. Just as Vader closes in on the sector where Ahsoka is evacuating the last shuttle, Rex pulls her up the ramp. Blaster fire and dust fill the air, and she feels that presence bearing down on her position. For a second, she almost turns back, almost demands to know who this is. Then the freighter punches skyward, leaving Vader to arrive at an empty landing pad, scorched footprints the only sign she was there. High above the city, Maul lingers in the shadows of a ruined control tower, watching Vader's shuttle through stolen macro binoculars. He reaches out in the Force and finally understands. The apprentice Sidious chose as the broken weapon he once knew as Anakin Skywalker. Maul smiles, not with joy, but with the cold satisfaction of a man who has just found the fault line in a planet. Now, let's get started on how that realization shapes his next move, because this near miss sets up every future confrontation between these three. And Son, now that Maul has named the fault line, everything in his mind starts to rearrange. We go from a wild theory screamed on Mandalore to a cold, methodical certainty. And the first real confirmation comes the hard way. Maul watching Vader work. In this timeline, Maul survives long enough to see the Emperor's new enforcer in action. On some shattered Outer Rim world, he watches from the shadows as Vader cuts through rebels and surviving clones with that brutal, forward-pressing style. The footwork is heavier, the blade angles are harsher, but Maul recognizes the rhythm. The same leaping aggression that once tore through Mandalorian commandos now sits inside a black suit. It is Anakin's recklessness, slowed by machinery, but sharpened by hate. Maul feels it in the Force too. Vader's presence is a stormfront, rage, loss, and that terrifying potential Sidious always coveted. When Vader hurls enemies aside without looking, when he charges straight into blaster fire because he knows fear better than they do, Maul hears his own words from Mandalore echoing back at him. He warned Ahsoka that Anakin was the key. She refused. Sidious did not. As I said, Maul has always been good at patterns. So he connects the dots. Dooku is gone, discarded the moment he outlived his usefulness. Sidious needed a new apprentice who could command armies, break Jedi, and embody the war itself. During the Siege of Mandalore, Maul felt Anakin burning at the center of the conflict. Now, there will be major spoilers for Maul's sanity, because when he sees Vader, all those scattered pieces snap into place. The Emperor's champion fights with Skywalker's ferocity, carries Skywalker's scars in the Force, and appears right after Skywalker vanishes. There's a twisted satisfaction in that realization. Maul was right. The golden boy of the Jedi Order did fall. The Council's favorite became exactly what Maul said he would become. The blade that would end them. For a moment, Maul almost laughs, hearing Obi-Wan's old, "Sith Lords are our specialty" line in his head and wanting to spit back, how did that specialty work out? But the horror lands even harder. Sidious's design worked perfectly this time. No rebellious apprentice, no half measure. Anakin Skywalker is now the purest expression of his master's will. That success terrifies Maul. It deepens his hatred and, strangely, his desperation to end the cycle. If Sidious can twist someone as bright as Anakin, then no one is safe from that corruption. Not even the one person who walked away. Because now, Ahsoka becomes more than an old adversary or a temporary ally. In Maul's eyes, she is the unstable variable. If she learns the truth about Vader, she could shatter Sidious's plans by reaching the man trapped inside the machine. Or she could break completely, become another weapon for the Emperor, or simply be destroyed to keep the secret buried. Any of those outcomes would reshape the war Maul is still fighting in his own broken way. I thought it would be fun to trace Maul's thinking here, because this is where his strategy shifts. He stops just trying to survive Sidious and starts plotting how to weaponize the Skywalker tragedy. Ahsoka's inevitable confrontation with Vader isn't a distant possibility to him, it's a fixed point on his internal timeline, so there's your warning. Maul resolves to guide that collision. He will feed Ahsoka clues, push her toward the mask, and try to turn their shared pain into a blade aimed at Sidious's heart. But what happens when the weapon you're forging has a will of its own? Now, let's get started on how that weapon actually moves in the shadows. Once Ahsoka and Maul go their separate ways after Mandalore, we jump forward into a darker, colder galaxy. The Republic is gone, the Empire is tightening its grip, and Ahsoka is doing what she's always done. Helping people, just now from the cracks of the system instead of a Jedi Council chamber. Her early encounters with the new regime feel familiar on the surface. She sees stormtroopers replacing clones, she hears whispers of Jedi being hunted, and eventually she crosses paths with Inquisitors. But in this timeline, every duel is filtered through what Maul told her about Sidious and Anakin. She knows the Inquisitors aren't just random Darksiders, they're products of a deliberate Sith pipeline. That sharper awareness is what pushes her to adopt the codename Fulcrum. As I said, the canon idea is still there, but now it's explicitly a counterintelligence role aimed at Sith manipulation, not just Imperial logistics. Working with Bail Organa becomes a lot more intense. In canon, she hints at the truth. Here, she lays it out with almost Fives level detail. I thought it would be fun to imagine that first real briefing. Bail, Mon Mothma, a few trusted senators in a closed room, and Ahsoka calmly explaining that the war they just survived was scripted by a single Sith Lord who sat in the Chancellor's office. She connects the dots. Dooku as a disposable apprentice, the inhibitor Chips Fives died, trying to expose, the timing of Order 66, and Sidious grooming Anakin as his successor. Now, there will be major spoilers for their idealism, so there's your warning. This early rebellion grows up fast. That ideological clarity bleeds into their strategy. They're not just fighting an authoritarian empire, they're fighting a religious cult of two that weaponized the entire galaxy. When Bail funds cells like Phoenix Squadron, he does it knowing that somewhere above Vader and the Inquisitors, there's still a spider in the web. Ahsoka is the one who keeps pointing at that upper layer. Rex, of course, is right there with her. Their little post-war squad turns into a quiet rescue network for clones. Using Fives' notes and what they learned on the Tribunal, Rex tracks down old comrades, pulls them out of active service when he can, and removes their chips in backroom surgeries and forgotten barns. Some of these veterans end up guarding safe houses, others train rebel recruits, and all of them carry a deep, personal hatred of the Empire that stole their free will. Through all of this, Ahsoka keeps one card hidden. She never tells Bail about Maul. Not fully. To the Rebellion, he's a rumor from the underworld, a ghost from the Clone Wars. Ahsoka understands that unleashing Maul's name could either rally terrified worlds or invite a new warlord into their fragile alliance. So she files him away as a contingency, a dangerous variable, but the galaxy is shrinking. As rebel cells link up and fleets start to form, the odds of Ahsoka and Maul crossing paths again stop being a question of if and become a question of when, and what happens when their next argument is echoed by capital ships exchanging fire overhead. Now, let's get started with how all of that crashing together energy reshapes the early Rebels era. In this timeline, when we meet the Ghost Crew, the broad strokes are the same, but the targets are different. Kanan, Hera, Ezra, Sabine, Zeb, and Chopper are still doing classic steel crates from the Empire missions. But Fulcrum's intel is sharper, almost surgical. Instead of random depots, they're hitting listening posts that feed directly into Imperial intelligence, Kyber shipments earmarked for secret Sith projects, and prisons that quietly hold Jedi survivors. As I said, that means from Episode 1, the squad is punching way above their weight. Hera doesn't just get coordinates, she gets context. Fulcrum flags certain admirals as Sidious adjacent, prioritizes worlds where Force activity spikes, and reroutes the Ghost away from traps that would have been fatal in canon. It feels less like scattered rebel cells and more like someone is quietly drawing a map of Palpatine's dark side infrastructure and handing it to one small, very loud ship. Because Ahsoka now knows Sidious and Vader are actively hunting apprentices, she takes a much more hands-on role with Force-sensitive leads. She doesn't just wait in the shadows for Kanan to reveal Ezra, she's already seeded protocols. Any report of weird powers or kid moved a crate by accident gets fast-tracked. When Kanan reaches out through Fulcrum about this street rat from Lothal, Ahsoka is there sooner, testing Ezra herself, quietly checking his visions for any hint of Sidious or Maul. I thought it would be fun to lean into how crowded that space becomes. Ahsoka is trying to protect these potential Jedi, but she also knows Maul is out there, running his own recruitment drive. So when the Ghost hits a Black Sun weapons convoy, and half the guards are already dead from Crimson Saber cuts, she doesn't buy that it was just pirates. When a Hutt broker suddenly forgives Hera's debt after a shadowy benefactor pays it off, she hears echoes of a Zabrak who once called himself Crime Lord. Now, there will be major spoilers for how this tension escalates. Maul's underworld web sometimes props up rebel missions mysterious allies jamming Imperial comms, slicers clearing Kanan's record, while other times it slams into them head-on, with the Ghost Crew unknowingly wrecking Maul's operations on Lothal and beyond. So, there's your warning that our friendly neighborhood rebels are walking through Maul's crosshairs long before Malachor. Of course, Vader and the Inquisitors feel this shift. Those sharper fulcrum hits on Sith-adjacent assets force them to reinforce Lothal's sector much earlier. The Grand Inquisitor doesn't just hunt a Jedi, he's specifically ordered to trace whoever keeps sabotaging Sidious's black projects. Early victories for the Ghost now come with immediate, brutal pushback. TIEs upgraded faster, inquisitorial visits more frequent, and Vader himself dispatched when patterns point toward Ahsoka. The result is a denser Rebels era. We don't just have Empire versus Rebels. We have Sidious's inner circle, Maul's criminal shadow, Ahsoka's fulcrum network, and one small squad of misfit heroes flying straight through the middle. Every skirmish has overlapping agendas, and the odds that Ahsoka, Maul, and Vader collide go from distant threat to looming certainty, setting up a much earlier, much messier confrontation than in canon. Now let's get started on the person who ends up right in the middle of all these overlapping agendas, Ezra Bridger. We go from Mandalore's throne room and the fall of the Jedi straight into the early days of Phoenix Squadron, where one street kid from Lothal becomes the next contested prize in this shadow war. Ezra's first brush with Ahsoka is still through the Fulcrum persona. She's the mysterious voice on the holoprojector, feeding missions to this small rebel squad that, of course, has no idea they're being guided by Anakin Skywalker's former Padawan. When Ahsoka finally meets Ezra in person, she clocks his force sensitivity almost instantly. She doesn't rush to claim him as a Padawan, but she gently backs Kanan's efforts, encouraging formal training while quietly warning both of them about anger and fear. As I said, she's not a Jedi Knight anymore, but she's still drawing on everything she learned from the Order and from watching Anakin walk that razor's edge. Now, there will be major spoilers for Rebels here, so there's your warning. When our timeline reaches Malachor, the whole tone shifts. In canon, Maul plays the old master game, but in this version, he's far more explicit. In the depths of that ancient Sith temple, surrounded by cracked statues and red-lit dust, Maul tells Ezra about Sidious by name, about being raised as a weapon, and about the day he tried to recruit Ahsoka Tano on Mandalore to strike at the true Sith. He frames it as, "I offered her the truth, and she chose her precious Jedi sentiment." That's a powerful story for a kid who's been told his whole life that the Empire holds all the power. Ezra ends up caught between two very different teachers. On the Ghost, Ahsoka's guidance is compassionate and cautious. She talks to him about patience, about listening to the Force, about protecting his squad without losing himself. On Malachor and other dark side nexuses, Maul offers the shortcut. Anger is fuel, fear is focus, power right now to keep his friends safe, and hit the Empire where it hurts. When Maul quotes, "We could destroy the Sith," it sounds less like a threat and more like a promise to a boy who watched his parents disappear. Because Ahsoka has already walked away from the Order and already partnered with Maul once, she recognizes the fingerprints of his teaching much earlier. She feels the way Ezra's presence ripples with aggression after Malachor. That leads to far more direct conversations. She doesn't just say, "The dark side is bad." She talks about Anakin's fall, about what happens when you try to fight Sith with Sith-like methods, about the cost of believing the ends justify the means. It's the kind of talk no one ever had with her in the temple. By the end of this phase of the timeline, Ezra isn't just a promising Padawan, he's a living battleground. Every choice he makes sits at the intersection of Ahsoka's light, Maul's vengeance, and Vader's looming darkness. And when all three of those forces converge on one ancient doorway in time and space, the consequences are going to be far bigger than a single apprentice's fate. Now, let's get started right where all those currents collide. The surface of Malachor. The place is dead and frozen, an ancient Sith superweapon turned into a stone graveyard. The ash, the statues, the suffocating silence, they were all built to do one thing: trap Force users and turn their fear into fuel. In this timeline, when Ahsoka, Maul, Kanan, Ezra, and Vader all converge here, the planet feels less like a setting and more like a loaded blaster pointed at the entire galaxy. We still have Ezra and Maul descending into the depths, but the energy between them is different now. Maul isn't just some mysterious old man. He's the shadow who once stood beside Ahsoka on Mandalore, the one she walked away from after their coup imploded and Order 66 roared to life. As I said, they both carry the scars of that failure, and Ezra is walking straight between them, hearing two different versions of the same tragedy without even realizing it. Maul plays the long game with Ezra, of course. He talks about the Sith, about Sidious, but now he can drop very specific lines. He tells Ezra that he is the only one who has consistently tried to kill Sidious, that when everyone else hesitated, he moved. He points to Mandalore, to the throne room where he named Anakin as the future Sith apprentice, and Ahsoka refused to accept it. She had her chance to end this war, he might echo, twisting the knife, but she would not embrace what was necessary. That's where the emotional weight between Ahsoka and Maul really hits. When she finally catches up to them in the temple, there's this instant, charged pause. They were once co-conspirators who almost toppled Sidious's plan before it fully hatched, and now they're enemies standing on the bones of another Sith disaster. I thought it would be fun to lean into that tension, so we can imagine Ahsoka snapping back that Maul abandoned Mandalore to burn, that his obsession with revenge cost them any chance to reach Anakin or Obi-Wan in time. Pattern interrupt here. What if the only person in the room who actually knows who Vader is the monster who killed Qui-Gon Jinn? Maul feels Anakin's presence long before the doors open. Ahsoka, in this version, has already pieced together enough from Mandalore, from the fall of the Jedi, to strongly suspect the truth. Kanan and Ezra are the last to understand, but they feel the temperature drop the moment Vader steps into the light of the temple. Now, there will be major spoilers for Rebels Season 2 here, so there's your warning. The three-way duel that follows is not just Jedi versus Sith. It's three clashing answers to the same question. How do you end the Sith without becoming them? Ahsoka goes straight for Vader with a personal fury we didn't see in canon, striking not just to defend Ezra, but to reach the man she believes is still trapped underneath the armor. Maul, by contrast, attacks Vader with pure, focused hatred, screaming that this is the pet Sidious replaced him with. Kanan and Ezra are caught between protecting each other, stopping the weapon, and not getting crushed by two living legends and one walking nightmare. Temple machinery begins to awaken as their blades clash, the superweapon humming to life around them. By the end of this section, we leave them mid-swing, Ahsoka bearing down on Vader, Maul circling for a killing blow, Ezra torn between masters, and Malachor itself waking up to judge which vision of the future survives. Now, let's get started right where we left off, because this is the moment the whole alternate timeline has really been building toward. Vader's blade meets Ahsoka's, Maul darts in from the flank, and for a second it just looks like pure chaos. But then Vader speaks. It's that filtered growl, the same cadence we heard on the bridge of the Profundity, and Ahsoka freezes for half a heartbeat. We watch her eyes, not the sabers. He presses forward with that same aggressive opening combination Anakin used on Geonosis and in so many Clone Wars episodes, hammering high, then cutting low with that signature reverse grip tell. Ahsoka counters on instinct, and you can almost hear her thinking, only one person ever trained me to respond to that exact move. As I said earlier, Maul warned her on Mandalore that Anakin was the key to everything. Now, there will be major spoilers for her denial, because in this version, she can't hide from it. Vader drives her back and snarls her name, Ahsoka, stressing it the way Anakin did when he was half scolding, half proud. That's the crack. She hears her master in the monster. She remembers the hologram of him cutting down Jedi in the temple that Maul forced her to watch, and suddenly those images line up with the rhythm of his footwork right in front of her. This isn't some abstract Sith Lord. This is the same man who joked about being a little overprotective of his Padawan. Maul, of course, sees the hesitation and goes straight for the jugular. He circles behind Vader, blade spinning, and taunts him over the clash of sabers. He calls him Skywalker on purpose, spitting the name out. He laughs that Sidious played them both, that the great Chosen One is now nothing but a wheezing enforcer, a discarded apprentice in a life support coffin. Maul basically throws his own tragedy in Vader's face, insisting they were both just tools. broken, masked, and replaceable. Ahsoka gets caught in the emotional crossfire. On one side, Maul's gloating proves how deep the corruption goes, feeding her anger. On the other, every time Vader overextends to protect his injured side, every labored breath reminds her of the boy who stayed up all night fixing her lightsabers. She wants to drag Anakin back, to prove Maul wrong about the dark side being inevitable, but she's also standing in a temple built on the bones of Vader's victims. Forgiveness feels almost impossible when the walls themselves echo with slaughter. Because there are two attackers now, the choreography changes completely. Maul keeps hacking at Vader's defenses from one flank, forcing him into these brutal, explosive bursts of power. We see more raw force than in the original Rebels episode. Shockwaves that fling ancient debris, a telekinetic choke that Maul only breaks by hurling his own saber as a distraction, and that terrifying moment where Vader just plants his feet and drags both of them backward with sheer hatred. It's not elegant, it's a storm. Eventually, their combined assault starts to win, and that's when Malachor itself turns against them. The superweapon surges, the temple floor splits, and massive stone slabs begin to fall. I thought it would be fun to mirror Domino Squad's impossible choices here, because now Ahsoka faces her own. She can stay with Maul, press the attack, and risk dying here with whatever is left of Anakin. Or she can grab Ezra and Kanan, pull them clear, and let the man behind the mask vanish into fire and dust again. She locks sabers with Vader one last time, looks straight through the lenses, and we cut on her decision, holding just long enough that we're desperate to see which bond she chooses to save. So, there's your warning. In the next section, the fallout from that choice reshapes not only Malachor, but the entire future of the rebellion. So, when we smash back in on Malachor, Ahsoka has made her choice. She won't abandon Ezra, she won't abandon Anakin's memory, and she absolutely will not hand Maul a clean escape route. The temple is tearing itself apart. The superweapon is overloading, and for a second it looks like everyone is going to die in a very ancient Sith health and safety violation kind of way. Ahsoka's solution is brutal. She orders Ezra and Kanan to run for the Phantom, and this time, Ezra actually listens. Now, there will be major spoilers for the end of Rebels here, so there's your warning. Instead of vanishing alone into the collapsing temple, she splits her focus. She keeps Vader locked down with those familiar, almost dance-like exchanges, and at the same time, she hurls Maul back into the central chamber with the Force, pinning him between falling debris and the thrumming energy of the weapon. Vader adapts first. He drives Ahsoka toward the heart of the machine, and Maul, sensing a chance to take out his old master, throws himself into the fight. We get this three-way clash where every blow is history. Former apprentice, discarded apprentice, and the monster who made them both. They were all shaped by Sidious, and now they're tearing his super weapon apart with their hatred. As I said, Maul is too stubborn to die cleanly. Vader batters him down, carves through his saber, and finally hurls him off the platform with a contemptuous force push. To Ahsoka, it looks final. We even echo the Phantom Menace, Maul falling into darkness, screaming, swallowed by the explosion as the temple seals. She feels his presence gutter out and believes, for years, that he died there, a last victim of the Sith he tried to overthrow. But in the rubble below, hatred keeps a spark alive. Buried, broken, Maul survives again, crawling away into the shadows of Malachor with that same feral will we saw after Naboo. I thought it would be fun to lean into that parallel, because Maul's story is a loop of falls and returns, each one nastier than the last. Vader does not walk away clean either. He staggers out from the collapsing structure, armor scorched, respirator glitching, having felt something he did not expect. Ahsoka and Maul fighting together, even briefly, with a clarity that cut through Anakin's buried loyalties. To him, that alliance is proof. If those two ever escape and tell the truth about Anakin Skywalker, they could rally the rebellion around the legend of a fallen hero instead of a faceless Jedi Order. From the Ghost Crew's perspective, though, it's simple and devastating. The temple implodes behind them, Vader emerges and then vanishes in the dust, and there is no sign of Ahsoka. Kanan hears nothing through the Force but screaming stone. Ezra feels only the echo of her last command, live. They mourn her as dead or lost, another Jedi cut down by the Empire's darkness. Yet her influence doesn't stop. Ezra trains with the holocrons she warned him about, repeats her lessons on compassion and restraint to Sabine and Zeb, and carries the weight of her unresolved mission to uncover the Sith Master behind Vader. Malachor becomes a whispered turning point. Those who were there know the Sith showed their true face, and the galaxy's fear hardens into resolve. But with Ahsoka and Maul both missing in action, and Vader now personally invested in hunting them, the stage is set for a far more personal rematch in the shadows of the early rebellion, and that's where our timeline takes an even darker turn. Now that both Ahsoka and Maul have vanished into the cracks of history, our timeline jumps forward to a very different kind of war. The Empire has settled in, Sidious sits on his throne, and Maul is no longer the roaring beast of Mandalore. He's older, more haunted, and for the first time since his rebirth, he understands something terrifying. His window to personally kill his former master is closing. The Emperor is no longer the Chancellor he once stalked from the shadows. Sidious is reclusive, wrapped in guards, bureaucracy, and the cold armor of the Death Star Project. Maul's underworld contacts whisper of red-robed sentinels, secret bunkers, and star destroyers that never report their true destinations. As I said, even for the former Sith apprentice who once survived being cut in half, this is a fortress he cannot storm alone. So he changes tactics. If he cannot reach the head, he will carve away the limbs. Vader and the Inquisitors become his new targets, the visible blades of Sidious's will. I thought it would be fun to really lean into this idea of Maul treating them the way he once treated Jedi generals, stalking their patrol routes, tracing rumors of red blades, waiting for the moment they get comfortable. To him, they were not dark legends. They were assets to be destroyed. His fixation on Ahsoka never really fades. In this altered timeline, their Mandalore alliance is the defining trauma of his later years. On his worst nights, he blames her for not going far enough, for refusing to strike Anakin before the fall, for disappearing after Malachor when the galaxy needed their squad of two most. On his better nights, he reaches out through the Force and secretly hopes she survived, that somewhere the former Padawan is still sharpening her hatred of the Sith into something cleaner than his own. We see that obsession bleed into his ambushes. In one brutal episode on a backwater industrial world, Maul lures a pair of Inquisitors with a fake Jedi distress signal. They arrive expecting frightened survivors. Instead, the doors slam, the lights cut, and all we hear is that familiar, mocking echo of, "There is no escape." When the power returns, the Inquisitors are dead, their blades added to Maul's grim collection, and a key Kyber shipment for an Imperial superweapon lies in ruins. In another strike, he sabotages an Imperial research station, killing clones, officers, and a dark acolyte in training. It's a small dent in the Sith machine, but symbolically, it's Maul screaming at the galaxy that Sidious can still bleed. Now, there will be major spoilers for where this is all heading, so there's your warning. In the middle of this private war, Maul suddenly feels something new. A light. Young, raw, impossibly familiar. Luke Skywalker? Maul realizes the Skywalker line is not finished, that Sidious has repeated the same mistake he made with Anakin. As I said, the Sith have planted the seed of their own undoing, and Maul, of course, intends to twist that seed as far as he can. Now, let's get started on how that collision course actually plays out. Now, let's get started on what Ahsoka actually does with that knowledge. Once the Skywalker name starts echoing across the galaxy again, in this timeline, she survives Malachor, but she doesn't come back as a public Jedi hero. She steps into the shadows on purpose. Ahsoka becomes something closer to what Maul once was in the underworld, but turned on its head. A quiet guardian and historian, moving between forgotten temples, Imperial archives, and old battlefields, recording the story of the Jedi and the Sith conflict. Instead of leading a squad of clones, she's leading a one-woman research mission on the Force itself. That withdrawn role means that when Alderaan dies, she isn't on a bridge watching it happen. She feels it. A pressure wave in the Force that rips through her, the way Obi-Wan described in A New Hope. Only for Ahsoka, it's not just a million voices. It's the confirmation of everything Maul screamed at her on Mandalore. Sidious will burn the galaxy to break his enemies. Now, there will be major spoilers for the original trilogy here, so there's your warning. From that moment on, she's tracking presences. 2 bright sparks moving around the edges of the war. One on Tatooine, then Yavin, then Hoth. One on Alderaan, then among the rebels, then aboard Imperial ships. Luke and Leia are not just names to her, they are living proof that the Skywalker line survived the purge she failed to stop. As I said, Maul told her Sidious had invested everything in Anakin. Now she can feel Sidious's downfall being written by Anakin's children. That creates brutal survivor's guilt. She tried to stop Sidious with Maul and failed. She tried to save Anakin on Mandalore and again on Malachor and failed. Now this farm boy she's never met does what she and Obi-Wan could not. When she feels Vader's presence flare, break, and then vanish at Endor, she understands exactly what happened. The apprentice Maul warned her about finally turned on the Master. It's everything they were fighting for, but she wasn't the one to do it. By the time we reach her appearances in The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, that whole emotional timeline is sitting behind every choice. When she tests Grogu and refuses to train him, it hits different now. She has watched Anakin and Ezra walk the edge between light and dark, both pulled by attachment, both targeted by Sith designs. Training another gifted child, when she has seen Maul's obsession and Sidious's patience up close, feels like opening the same wound again. Her caution with Ezra in this universe is even sharper. She's the one who saw Maul latch onto the boy on Malachor, turning a Jedi apprentice into a potential Sith project. So of course she's wary of dragging Ezra into more power, more temptation, more time-bending world-between-worlds tricks. By the New Republic era, Ahsoka has become a living bridge between eras. She carries personal memories from the Clone Wars, the Empire, the Rebellion, and now this fragile peace. And in the middle of all that history is one haunting constant. The memory of the day on Mandalore, when a Jedi and a Sith almost broke the cycle together. The question now is whether she can ever risk trying something that bold again. Now, let's zoom out and look at what that one choice on Mandalore actually did to the rise of the Empire. We've been in the trenches with Ahsoka and Maul, but this is where we see how their temporary squad-up quietly rewrites galactic history. The first big shift is the immediate aftermath of Order 66. On Ahsoka's cruiser and cannon, we already know it's chaos, with Rex fighting his chip and the clones turning on her. Here, it's worse. Maul is not just a prisoner breaking loose, he's an active partner who understands Sidious's endgame. So when the command hits, the clones are trying to execute a former Jedi, a rogue Sith, and protect their own chain of command all at once. The ship becomes a 4-way battlefield. Loyal clones, confused officers, Ahsoka and Rex, and Maul carving through corridors, almost treating it as a fun stress test of Sidious's masterpiece. Because Maul survives as a fully aware anti-Sidious agent, the underworld hears the truth about the Sith much earlier. He still has pieces of the Shadow Collective. He still has contacts on Mandalore. And he now has Ahsoka's reluctant testimony that something about Palpatine and Anakin went horribly wrong. So, there's your warning. The criminal element doesn't just react to the Empire as another regime. They understand that a hidden Sith order is running the show. That means when the Empire starts nationalizing shipping lanes and squeezing syndicates, Maul can coordinate pushback instead of isolated turf wars. This leads into the second major change. The Empire faces a more organized, more informed underworld resistance. Instead of the syndicates being picked off one by one, Maul turns them into a loose squad with a single priority: bleed Sidious's new regime. Imperial convoys disappear in regions they thought were secure. Recruitment worlds are flooded with black market weapons, and early Imperial garrisons on fringe systems are pulled back to deal with terrorist cells that are actually Maul's network testing their armor. Resources that, in canon, went straight into building up the fleet and tightening the Outer Rim now have to be diverted to shadow wars in places the Emperor once considered beneath his notice. Psychologically, this rattles both Sidious and Vader. As I said, Sidious has already broken 2 apprentices, Maul and Dooku. Now he has to process that Maul didn't just crawl away. He almost flipped a former Jedi commander, and then actually did ally with her against him. Vader, who remembers Ahsoka as his Padawan and Maul as a constant thorn in his side from the Clone Wars, is forced to live with the knowledge that two of the people who understand him best chose to stand together against the Sith path he embraced. That's not just a tactical concern, it's an emotional landmine. Every rumor of a Togruta with white sabers or a horned Zabrak pulling strings in the underworld becomes a personal affront. So the Inquisitorius and Imperial intelligence evolve in a much more paranoid direction. Now, there will be major spoilers for some of the usual Inquisitor story beats, so there's your warning. Instead of focusing almost exclusively on hunting scattered Jedi, they develop specialized task forces for Mandalore-adjacent anomalies. We'd see entire episodes where Inquisitors interrogate Night Owl veterans, track down old clone officers from the Siege of Mandalore, and obsess over any lead that mentions a red-bladed Zabrak working with a former Jedi commander. Imperial intelligence, already ruthless, starts compiling massive dossiers on Mandalorian clans, former GR squads that served under Ahsoka, and even Kaminoan scientists who touched the inhibitor chip program. The paranoia is institutionalized. Now let's get started on the bigger question. Does any of this actually stop the Empire from dominating the galaxy? The answer is no, at least not on the surface. The Senate still falls, the Jedi Order is still shattered, and the Stormtrooper legions still march. But the internal stress fractures are deeper. The Empire bleeds more credits on counterinsurgency in the underworld, Vader and Sidious spend more time hunting ghosts from their past, and the Inquisitors are stretched thinner, chasing specific Mandalorian-linked targets. When the formal rebellion eventually coalesces, they're tapping into networks that Maul and Ahsoka accidentally primed years earlier. So Palpatine's fall becomes slightly more likely, and when it finally happens above Endor, it feels less like a miracle and more like the culmination of cracks that have been spreading since that throne room on Mandalore. And the real twist is that both the light and the dark helped make those cracks. And that's where the Jedi legacy in this timeline really starts to bend. If the cracks in Palpatine's plan come from both light and dark, then the people who live through it carry a much stranger story forward than the one we know. First, the clones. Because Ahsoka and Maul disrupt Order 66 earlier and harder, Rex doesn't just save himself and a handful of troopers on that Star Destroyer. With Maul's underworld intel and Ahsoka's trust, they were able to identify more chip anomalies, more Kaminoan supply routes, more slicers who can actually pull the things out. Over the next few years, a small but stubborn community of de-chipped veterans forms. They're scattered across the Outer Rim, running freight, guarding little towns, even training local militias. And when people ask what the Jedi were really like, these clones don't talk about traitors. They talk about generals who bled with them. Now, there will be major spoilers for Rebels-era dynamics here, so there's your warning. When we get to Ezra Bridger in this altered timeline, he isn't just the scrappy kid mentored by Kanan and visited by Ahsoka. He's standing in a lineage where Ahsoka once fought beside a Sith against Sidious, and where Maul didn't just vanish after Malachor. I thought it would be fun to lean into that. Ezra's training sessions now include Ahsoka warning him about the Council's blind spots, while hollow recordings of Maul's old rants about the Sith and the Jedi echo in the background. Ezra hears the seductive logic of the dark side spelled out, step by step, but he also sees that Maul's obsession never actually healed anything. As I said, that ripples outward to other survivors. Someone like Quinlan Vos, already comfortable coloring outside the lines, starts hearing rumors in the underworld. A former Padawan who teamed up with a horned Sith to try to stop the Emperor. For a Jedi who once fell in love with an assassin and brushed up against the dark, that story hits hard. The code stops being a simple, light-good, dark-bad equation and turns into a question of intent, attachment, and outcome. Do you really break the code if you work with a monster to kill a bigger monster? Eventually, all of this reaches Luke. Not directly at first. He hears it in fragments, an old clone on some backwater telling him, General Tano fought with the Sith to save us, or a smuggler repeating a half-true tale about Mandalore. When Luke starts rebuilding the Order, those stories sit in the back of his mind. Now let's get started on what that actually changes. He's still chasing balance, but he's less interested in recreating a pristine temple and more focused on teaching messy, honest responsibility. The Jedi become people who admit they might have to make terrible alliances in impossible situations. So in this timeline, the Jedi legacy isn't a marble statue, it's a scarred living memory of survivors, students, and even former Sith trying to do the right thing in the worst possible era. And the next big question is what happens when that kind of legacy finally collides with the dyad of Ben Solo and Rey. So in that scarred legacy, Luke doesn't arrive as a farm boy stepping into a myth from scratch. He's walking into a story that Ahsoka, Maul, and a whole generation have already bled over. Now, let's get started with how that actually changes his path, without breaking the core of the original trilogy. First, the rebellion in this timeline is just a bit more informed. Because Ahsoka survives Mandalore with Maul's knowledge rattling around in her head, her Fulcrum-era intel hits very differently. She doesn't just say the Emperor is dangerous. She can tell Bail and Mon Mothma, in hushed briefings, that he is a Sith Lord who once went by Darth Sidious, the same shadow name Maul cursed for years. So by the time we reach that Death Star throne room, Alliance leadership has already pieced together that Luke isn't just confronting a political tyrant, he's stepping into an ancient Sith succession plan. That changes Luke's education in subtle but important ways. As I said, Obi-Wan and Yoda still train him in secret, still stress discipline and detachment, but rumors travel. Pilots on Yavin talk about a former Jedi who walked away before the war's end, a Togruta who fought clones and Mandalorians and then vanished. Luke hearing whispers of Fulcrum, and Ahsoka plants this tiny seed of doubt. Was the Jedi way as rigid as Ben makes it sound if someone could leave and still fight for the light? I thought it would be fun to lean into one pattern interrupt here. Imagine Luke, fresh off that first training remote scene on the Falcon, hearing Han grumble that some mystery Jedi once worked with smugglers and crime lords to hurt the Empire's supply lines. Suddenly, the Force isn't just monks and temples. It's backroom deals, coded transmissions, and people who bend rules to save lives. That's where Maul's underworld war comes in. His long shadow over syndicates means the Empire never fully locks down certain sectors. So missions like stealing the Death Star plans are still desperate, still lethal, but now they're slightly less suicidal because Rebel cells can coordinate with Black Sun fragments or disillusioned Crimson Dawn captains. Instead of a clean military op, it feels more like a wild heist episode where spies, smugglers, and former Maul loyalists briefly become the same squad. After Return of the Jedi, Luke's journey deepens off-screen. We can picture an older Ahsoka meeting him on some quiet world, trading stories. She tells him about Anakin on Mandalore, about Maul screaming that Skywalker was the key to Sidious's grand design. She explains how the dark side doesn't just tempt with anger, but with certainty, with the promise that you can finally fix everything the Council failed to fix. Now, there will be major spoilers for our next section, so there's your warning. The important part here is that Luke's core beats stay the same. Twin sons, trench run, facing Vader, redeeming Anakin. But the context around him is richer. He's not the first to challenge the Sith's cycle, only the first to finish the job, standing on the shoulders of a survivor who walked away, and a former Sith who tried, in his own twisted way, to tear the system down from the shadows. Now, let's zoom in on the one character whose fate might shift the most in this new timeline, Maul himself. In canon, his story ends in one of the quietest, most haunting scenes in all of Star Wars. Far away from Mandalore, far away from the clones, and far away from Ahsoka. On Tatooine, Maul tracks down Obi-Wan, still clinging to that old obsession. He thinks Kenobi is hiding something, and he's right. They were both watching over the same boy. The duel is over in a single, elegant exchange, Obi-Wan cutting Maul down as he tries the same move he used on Qui-Gon. Cradled in his old enemy's arms, Maul dies, believing the Chosen One will avenge them both by destroying Sidious. He will avenge us, is his final, bitter comfort. But if Ahsoka accepted his offer on Mandalore, that entire endpoint starts to wobble. Suddenly, Maul doesn't just have a name and a vague plan. He has a partner who actually understands Anakin and the Jedi. As I said earlier, he stops being a lone mad dog and becomes part of a strange little squad of Sith survivor and ex-Jedi, all focused on one thing, tearing down Sidious's new empire. In that case, does Maul still waste years chasing Obi-Wan through the desert? Or does he stay locked onto Vader and the Emperor, Convinced that striking at the Master and the fallen apprentice is the only move that matters now? I thought it would be fun to lean into that second option. Maul's underworld network, his Shadow Collective remnants, and Ahsoka's rebel contacts eventually converge into targeted strikes against Inquisitors, supply lines, and Imperial black sites, not a lonely hunt for a hermit. His death, then, could be very different. Picture a failed ambush on Vader, where Maul miscalculates and a squad of Inquisitors pins him down. Or a last stand on some forgotten world, holding a landing pad while Ahsoka and a group of refugees escape, trading taunts with an Imperial commander who calls him the Emperor's discarded trash. It has that same tragic energy, but now the obsession is focused where it always should have been, on Sidious's shadow. Thematically, this lets us do something powerful. In Rebels, Maul dies never really knowing that Luke will redeem Anakin, that the Emperor will fall, and that the light side, in a very real sense, wins. Here, he does. Now, there will be major spoilers, so there's your warning. If Ahsoka survives into the era of Luke and Vader's final confrontation, she can be the one who tells Maul, near the end, that Anakin came back. Imagine that scene. Maul is wounded, surrounded by the bodies of Inquisitors, breathing hard. Ahsoka kneels beside him, much like Obi-Wan once did, and Maul finally hears that Sidious lost everything. The Chosen One did destroy him, but not in the way Maul expected. The boy he wanted to weaponize against the Sith instead chose compassion. For a second, Maul has to confront the possibility that the light he rejected, the path he mocked, actually carried the day. Ahsoka can offer him the one thing he always craved, acknowledgement. She can tell him he was right about Sidious, right about the rot, but that he was wrong about what you do once you see it. That's where his legacy really shifts. Maul becomes a cautionary tale of someone who saw the Sith's corruption, clearer than almost anyone, and still couldn't escape their logic. He traded one master's chains for another's, then for his own. Ahsoka, by contrast, walks away from both Jedi dogma and Sith vengeance. She proves that you can see the same darkness Maul saw and choose not to be consumed by it. Now, let's get started on what that means for the wider galaxy, because if Maul and Ahsoka reshape his ending, they also reshape how the Rebellion understands the Force, the Sith, and the Skywalker line. Now that we've seen how that single choice on Mandalore reshapes Maul's fate, we need to zoom out and look at what it does to Ahsoka herself. Her entire timeline becomes one long shedding of labels: Padawan, Exile, Commander, Maul's ally, Survivor, Fulcrum, and finally something closer to a cosmic wanderer than a soldier. She starts where we remember her, of course, as Anakin's snippy Padawan, thrown into a war she never asked for. Then we hit that brutal turning point, wrongfully accused of bombing the Jedi Temple, hunted by her own squad of clones, and walking away from the Order when they try to patch it over. In this alternate path, that experience is the foundation that lets her even consider Maul's offer. She already knows institutions fail. The question is whether individuals can still be saved. On Mandalore, teaming up with Maul forces her to confront the hard ceiling of Jedi teachings in war. The Jedi say no attachment, trust the Council, trust the Republic. Maul offers something uglier: trust no one, weaponize attachment, and strike first. Fighting beside him through the streets of Sundari, watching Rex and Bo-Katan try to coordinate with the former Sith, Ahsoka has to admit that sometimes your only available allies are deeply flawed. As I said, she doesn't excuse him, but she learns to operate in that gray zone the Jedi kept pretending didn't exist. I thought it would be fun to track how that changes her attempts to save Anakin. Armed with Maul's explicit warning about Sidious grooming Anakin, she rushes back into the Coruscant chaos not just as a worried friend, but as someone trying to derail a Sith succession plan. She confronts him earlier, challenges his secret meetings with Palpatine, and even tries to pull Padme into the conversation. Now, there will be major spoilers, so there's your warning. It still doesn't stop his fall. But that seed matters. When Luke later stands before Vader on the second Death Star, some of the doubt in Anakin's eyes in this timeline comes from that earlier collision with Ahsoka, the one person who had seen both Jedi hypocrisy and Sith manipulation, and still believed he could choose differently. Eventually, that history shapes how cautious she is with the next generation. With Ezra, she refuses to be a traditional master, always steering him away from obsession with power or revenge. With Grogu, she flat out declines to train him, citing attachment after watching both Anakin and Maul be devoured by it. The clones in her life were bred for obedience. Those two boys are raised in a galaxy built on obsession, and she will not repeat the Council's mistakes. By the time the Empire falls, Ahsoka is something new. Neither Jedi nor Sith, she's the woman who once tried to bridge that divide on Mandalore, and carries the scars as her scripture. Now, let's get started on what happens when the wider galaxy finally notices that this Wanderer, not the Jedi Council, might be the closest thing the Force has to a neutral witness. When we zoom out from the explosions and duels, this whole alternate timeline really spotlights one of Star Wars' deepest tensions. Can you reach for the enemy's tools, their allies, even their knowledge, without paying a price for it? Ahsoka teaming up with Maul is basically the galaxy's biggest stress test of that question. In canon, she rejects him and keeps her hands clean, but the war rolls on to the same terrible endpoint. Here, she accepts his offer, and we watch her walk a tightrope. She uses Maul's underworld network, his Shadow Collective tactics, even his insight into Sidious and Anakin, to try to save lives. But every time she leans on those methods, the cost shows up somewhere else, in Rex's shaken faith, in clones forced into street fighting instead of clean battlefield engagements, and Bo-Katan having to say, "You're starting to sound like him. The Force doesn't let anyone borrow darkness for free." That leads into another big thing this what if really underlines. Star Wars talks a lot about destiny, about the chosen one, about prophecies, but this Mandalore decision proves that individual choices still matter more than any script. As I said, Ahsoka accepting Maul's hand doesn't magically stop Order 66, or flip a light switch that keeps Anakin out of the Chancellor's office. Sidious still moves his pieces. The Empire still rises. But the ripples are everywhere. Certain Jedi survive because Ahsoka and Maul drag the truth about the chips into the open earlier. Other Jedi die sooner because Maul draws extra fire. Whole battles shift. Whole squads of clones end up on different planets, under different commanders, with different scars. Now, there will be major spoilers, so there's your warning. The most tragic and hopeful part of this timeline is Maul himself. He's still the kid from Dathomir who was taken, broken, and turned into a weapon. And he's still the man who chose to keep that cycle going. His near alliance with Ahsoka shows us how close the galaxy came to a very different kind of resistance. One built on exiles, criminals, and disillusioned Jedi teaming up before the rebellion was ever a logo on a starfighter. When he snarls, "We could have destroyed him," it lands differently here, because for a few episodes in this timeline, that almost feels true. And yet, the Empire's broad outline barely moves. Palpatine still crowns himself. The Death Star still casts its shadow. Luke still stares at twin suns. That tells us something important about Star Wars as a whole. Some events are incredibly resilient. The big mythic beats want to happen. But everything around them, the fates of the background Jedi, the texture of the early rebellion, which clones desert and which stay, is wildly fluid. I thought it would be fun to end this section by looping back to where all of this started. The Siege of Mandalore and Season 7 of the Clone Wars are not just a prequel checklist for Revenge of the Sith. They are a fulcrum. One word from Ahsoka on that throne room floor could have tipped the saga into a stranger, harsher, but also more honest kind of hope. Now, let's get started on what that means for the later eras of the story, when Luke, Leia, and even Rey inherit a galaxy shaped by a Togruta who once said yes to a former Sith. Now, let's get started on how that one word on Mandalore quietly rewrites the New Republic era. The Mandalorian and Ahsoka shows are already soaked in history, but in this timeline, Mandalore carries an extra ghost. The day a Togruta ex-Jedi, a proud night owl, and a horned former Sith Lord stood together on the same side of a throne room. On the surface, Mandalore still falls. The Empire still bombs, occupies, and eventually glassifies the planet. But culturally, they were different. Stories spread of the Night of Three Blades when Ahsoka, Bo-Katan, and Maul turned on Sidious's design and briefly stabilized the world. Clan elders argue over it in hushed tones. Some call it proof that Mandalorians can weaponize outsiders. Others whisper that inviting a Sith into your war council cursed the planet for generations. By the time we get to Din Djarin, those tales are half legend, half classified report. The children of the Watch talk about the Orange Warrior who fought without a helmet but with honor, and the devil-horned sorcerer who betrayed the Empire before the Empire was even born. When Din hears Bo-Katan's name, in this timeline it already carries the weight of that impossible alliance, not just her later failures. Her claim to leadership is tied to surviving that episode on Mandalore, holding the line between Ahsoka's mercy and Maul's brutality. I thought it would be fun to imagine Din and Bo around a campfire on the ruined surface, trading stories. Din grew up on tales of Death Watch and the Horned Usurper. Bo was there. She remembers Ahsoka deflecting blaster bolts from clones that used to be her squad, while Maul carved through super commandos with the same casual cruelty he used on droids. Din's creed says Jedi are sorcerers. But when he hears that one of those sorcerers bled for Mandalore against the same empire that later took his childhood, his trust in Ahsoka during The Mandalorian hits a little faster, a little deeper. Now, there will be major spoilers for Ahsoka's own series, so there's your warning. Her hunt for Thrawn and Ezra already echoes her past, but here it's sharpened. She once tried to pull Ezra away from Maul's influence in Rebels. In this timeline, she also remembers the one time she chose to stand with Maul on Mandalore, and how close she came to losing herself. Every time Baylan Skoll tempts Sabine, every time Thrawn offers cold logic over compassion, Ahsoka is running her own internal simulation of that earlier decision, recalculating where trust ends and corruption begins. Maul's underworld war also leaves a different scar on the Imperial remnants Din and Ahsoka fight. In canon, groups like Gideon's draw from pure Imperial fanaticism. Here, some warlords are ex-Maul enforcers who survived his Shadow Collective and then the Empire, used to serving a master who hated both Jedi and Sith orthodoxy. Their tactics are nastier, their knowledge of Mandalorian politics deeper. Gideon's obsession with Mandalore and its clones tech feels less random and more like the last echo of Maul's old strategy. Control the warriors, control the war. As I said, this turns the modern shows into a treasure hunt. Rewatch The Mandalorian and Ahsoka in this altered timeline, and every mention of Mandalore, every uneasy glance at Ahsoka's lightsabers becomes a clue to that throne room choice. The fun is spotting where a single yes on Mandalore could still be rippling decades later, in the way Din holds the darksaber, in Bo-Katan's guilt, and in Ahsoka's silence whenever someone mentions a horned devil who once fought on their side. So when we zoom out now, we can really see the full shape of this alternate timeline. One word in that throne room, one yes instead of no, and suddenly Ahsoka Tano is standing shoulder to shoulder with Darth Maul, trying to preempt a Sith plan that's already in motion. I thought it would be fun to trace how that one decision doesn't save the galaxy, but it absolutely warps its scars. We started with the Siege of Mandalore itself, where the choreography changes but the stakes stay the same. Instead of that clean Jedi versus Sith duel, we get a coup run by a former Sith apprentice and a former Jedi Padawan, Bo-Katan and the clones caught in the middle as this fragile squad of convenience tries to topple Sidious from the shadows. Maul actually tells the truth about Anakin, and Ahsoka believes him just soon enough to act, but not soon enough to stop the fall. From there, Order 66 hits like a glitching hollow record. The escape is messier, more chaotic, as I said. Rex is fighting his own chip, Maul is tearing through Star Destroyer corridors, and Ahsoka is trying to keep her allies alive, while also hunting the source of the command itself. The purge still happens. The temple still burns. But now, somewhere in the smoke, there's the knowledge that someone tried to pull the fire alarm early. Eventually, that leads us into Maul's underworld war. Instead of just ruling Mandalore, he's weaponizing the Shadow Collective against his old master, pulling Crimson Dawn and the Syndicates into a cold civil war under the Empire's nose. Ahsoka, in her Fulcrum era, is using those same channels, those same broken criminals and frightened civilians, to feed the rebellion. They were never really partners, but they're orbiting the same wound in the Force. By the time we reach Malachor, the duel is completely reshaped. Now, there will be major spoilers for Rebels, and even for how we think about Vader on the Death Star, so there's your warning. When Ahsoka faces Vader, when Maul toys with Ezra, every line is loaded with the history of that first yes on Mandalore. She's not just seeing the monster her brother became, she's seeing the proof that even teaming up with a horned devil wasn't enough. That's the core idea here. Saying yes didn't magically fix anything. It just created new alliances, new betrayals, and new chances for resistance that make the story richer and more tragic. Now let's get started, imagining specific scenes differently. The throne room on Mandalore, with Maul and Ahsoka fighting together. The Jedi Temple burning while a hidden network scrambles to react. Vader standing before the Emperor on the Death Star with the ghost of a failed anti-Sith squad hanging over them. So, what other decision points would you want to see reordered like this? Should Fives have survived Kamino? Should Kanan have walked away earlier? And do you think Ahsoka and Maul could ever have trusted each other enough to actually kill Sidious? Or would one of them have turned the second the throne was empty? If this changed how you see the Clone Wars and Rebels, consider subscribing for more full timeline what-if breakdowns. Drop a like, share it with a friend who still quotes, "I was hoping for Kenobi" every time Maul shows up, and rewatch the Mandalore arc with this alternate path in mind. The fun now is spotting every moment where that one word, yes, could still be echoing through the galaxy.